What happens when a man wakes up one day and his world is shattered in an instant? When the life built around love, care, sacrifice for his children is torn apart by an unimaginable loss. As men, we're taught to be strong, silent, and steady, but no one teaches us how to grieve, how to fall apart, or how to put ourselves back together. And when grief strikes, it doesn't just knock on the door, kicks it down, exposing every insecurity, every emotion we've hidden deep inside of ourselves. And so in today's episode, we're going to explore a father's real and raw and powerful journey through his grief and the things that he had to face in life. This is not going to be about us talking about signs of weaknesses, but it's an invitation for us to heal, to be vulnerable, and to have deep emotional courage. And so if this sounds like a message that's already stirring with something within you, then I'd like you to just take one moment and hit like and subscribe and share this episode with someone who you think is silently carrying the weight of grief, because it's your support that helps us reach more people out there who are facing their pain and trying to find purpose on the other side of it. And with that, let's get on with today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement and your host, Alan DeMonso. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. What if the most courageous thing a man could do is to not hide his pain, but to speak it out loud, raw, broken, and real? And how would your healing change if you gave yourself permission to stop pretending that you're okay and instead allowed yourself to simply be human? Grief doesn't ask for permission, does it? It changes everything. But in the rubble of our loss, some men rise, not with armor, but with honesty. And today's conversation is going to show us what it truly means to grieve like a father and to lead with vulnerability. In order to do that today, allow me to introduce my guest. Jason Tuttle is a married father of 2 kids with multiple mental and physical disabilities, and some of them are pretty rare. Jason was a stay-at-home dad for 12 years until his son suddenly and unexpectedly passed away from issues related to his needs in January 28th of 2022. Since that day that his son passed, Jason has created a website, Facebook page, a blog, and a community called Letters to Zachary, grief that details his raw, unfiltered, and open grief journey from a father's perspective. It is a place where men can feel vulnerable enough to share their emotion, empower women to help the grieving men in their lives, and to see that it's okay for us to be vulnerable through his example. And this is a community that Jason says is open to everyone. And so welcome to the show, Jason. How are things, brother?
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the glowing intro.
Jason, as we were getting ready to come on today's show, I was telling you we're going to do our best to keep our crap together because this is a really heavy topic. It means so much to me to hear and see the work that you're doing to help men. And so let's talk about this hero's journey of yours and about this quest. And I know it's deep and deeply personal. And if you don't mind, take us back to that day when your life changed and how that shaped you into the man you are today and the work that you're doing.
It's more or less 2 days that kind of changed my life. And the first part I'll go a little bit into. When my wife and I decided we had gotten married and we'd had our first full year of marriage together because we wanted to at least have the first year where we didn't have kids or that kind of responsibility. And so the second year we decided that we were a little older in the sense we were in our later 20s versus in our mid 20s when we got married. And my wife said she is from the New England states of the US and they're all cradle Catholics and they all come one of 9 up there. And like when we first got to talking, she said, I want 4 kids. And my first response was, let's have the first one and then we'll talk. And I wanted 3, so having a 4th one wasn't a stretch at that point. And she got pregnant reasonably quickly, and we had no reason to believe that there was gonna be any issues up until that week 20 appointment, which is the one where they find out the sex of the child. And I could go on and on about it, but basically what happened in that appointment was they found an issue. The ultrasound tech couldn't really talk about it. Honestly, I think for kind of liability reasons, it was something the doctor had to tell us. And from that point until my son was born, we had to see what a perinatologist, which is basically a high risk OBGYN, is what a perinatologist is. And it actually, what we knew that there was going to be some significant issues. We didn't necessarily know which of them. And the rare issue we had no idea about until the day he was born. And we found out at that point that he had a rare condition. It was 1 in 40,000 births at that point. And so when I say that life changed for me in two different times, I didn't realize it at the time, but I was essentially grieving the life I thought we were going to have versus the life that we were dealt, so to speak. And I dealt with a lot of emotions, not realizing that's what it was in the beginning. Although later years down the road, after I finally started going to counseling and therapy, I realized that's what it was. And then 2 years later, when my daughter was born, 6 months after she was born, literally all of the same issues, except for the rare condition she had. So within the first 5 years of our marriage, we had two kids, all with four conditions that were pretty common and one rare issue. And we were in year 5 of our marriage. Fast forward through at this point, the next 11, 12 years, my son's in middle school. I believe it was 8th grade at that point. And throughout his time, he was susceptible to respiratory related illnesses, that kind of thing. And he had been in and out of the hospital most of his life for those kind of issues. And about 3 days before he passed, he got sick that evening, and it didn't really strike me. I thought maybe he had a 24-hour bug, which he had gotten multiple times in his life. And that evening, when he was normally a really good sleeper, he was up and down all night, which kind of struck me as odd. And that next day, I was a stay-at-home parent at the time, and I looked at my wife, said, "I'm gonna call his teacher," because he was in a self-contained special ed classroom, and I didn't know if what he had was contagious, and I didn't want it to spread. So I let them know, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna keep my son home. I'm not sure what he's got, but I don't know if he's contagious. I'm being safe." Okay, wonderful. That next day, I kept telling him all day, "Buddy, you can take a nap. You can fall asleep. I know you're tired. You had to have been up and down all night long." He absolutely refused. He didn't want to eat a whole lot, and he didn't really want to drink a whole lot. And at least for that first day, it caught my attention, but it didn't really surprise me. Now, if he'd have gone into that second day and not wanted to drink, I would have gone, something's not right here." And so that was Wednesday night. He stayed home Thursday. I decided at last minute, I said, "I'm gonna keep him home Friday. If he's not better, at least he's got the weekend to recover, and then hopefully he'll be better by Monday." Teacher was fine with it. His mother was just like, "Okay," because I was the caregiver. She just, "Whatever you think is best." So that Friday morning, I get my daughter up, I get her going, I get her on the bus. And I leave my son in his bedroom to wake up like when he does on the weekend, usually 9:30, so he could sleep in some. And so I go into his room, which I'm in his room, as you can see the Z on the back wall. And I walk over to his bed, over where the lamp in the background is. And usually when I would get him up, he'd clap and get excited and squeal and giggle and bounce and all that, seeing us get him up. And I opened the door, and he opened his eyes, and he just kind of looked at me, and I wouldn't say he was lethargic, but he just didn't really respond. And so I walk over to where the lamp is behind me, and I look at him, and there's a dark green streak of fluid coming out of his mouth. And I look at my wife, and I instantly say, I said, "The only thing that I know that is dark green in your body is bile, and why is it coming out of his mouth?" And I immediately looked at her and said, "This is not good."
No.
So I pick him up, and he's floppy, like he can't hold himself up. And that didn't strike me because I'd had a couple of times before where that happened. I just thought maybe this has progressed and I need to take him to the hospital. So I get him out into the living room, and I have this medical protocol in my head of these steps that I take when I feel like he's sick to cover my bases, and then I make a decision. Like his rare condition, when he was younger, I would have to cath him to drain his bladder. And so I immediately cathed him. I drained his bladder. I didn't get a whole lot out. Nothing really struck me except for the fact I felt his like stomach by his belly button and it was rock hard. And when I say rock hard, I'm like cinder block wall rock hard. And that caught my attention because I'd never felt that before. Because of his rare condition, his stomach was really pliable and really squishy almost. And so when I felt that, I was just like, I literally looked at my wife. I said, "This is not right. I don't know what's going on." So I paused for a minute and I think, what am I going to do? Am I going to call an ambulance or am I going to take him up to the hospital? And I went, you know what? I'm going to take him up to the hospital. So I get him dressed, get him in his wheelchair, get him in our van, and I do 90 miles an hour up to the hospital. I get him up to the hospital and kind of get in the parking deck, and I go to get him out of the van to put him in his chair, and he's very floppy at this point, and it catches my eyes. And in my head, I'm thinking something's really wrong. I don't know what's going on here. So I get in, I get up to the ER, and most ERs, there's a queue that you have to go through. So I get in there and I skip it. And the security guard comes over to me as if to yell at me to say I need to get in line. And I literally looked at him and go, he's not breathing. I need someone's help immediately. And so he snaps his fingers. The nurse comes over. Now, understand this hospital was the hospital we always went to. I'd been in it 100 times before. This is the first time that the nurse had ever looked at me and said, "Follow me." And we ran as fast as we could back to the ER. We get in there and we get into one of the trauma rooms, and I instinctively get him out of his chair. I put him on the table or gurney or whatever you want to call it in there. And I instinctively back out of the way because he's nonverbal and he can't tell them what's going on. And plus, the state he was in, I don't think he would have been able to talk at that point, anyways. So it just so happened there's another trauma room where the doors are open, and I back off in there and they let me stay in there. So they all come in there and it's like ants off an anthill. And there had to have been like 30 people that all rushed in there and got in their positions to start doing what they were going to do. I'm watching, they get him in there, they immediately intubate him, which is put the tube down to get air into his lungs. They cut off his clothes. And the first thing they do is they go down to his knee and literally drill like a port into his knee, like directly into the bone. And I'm watching this and my son doesn't even flinch. Now, later on down the road, I go, if I was fully aware and someone took a drill and drilled into my knee, I would come off the table because it would be ridiculous. It would be so painful. You would probably pass out because it was so painful. Later, I asked, I said, what was that for? And they said, when a patient comes in like this and we don't know what's going on, it's a way to get antibiotics and something else into him very quickly. And I said, okay, then I understand why he did that. So they're doing that and they almost immediately start chest compressions on him. Now, granted, I'm watching and it's not dawning on me the severity of what's going on. Head ER doc comes over to me and goes, down to the minute, how long has he been this way? And I tell her and she goes off, she barks orders. And she comes back to me a second later and she goes, explain to me this scenario as to why you brought him up here. And I told her. She then goes off and barks orders and comes back. Oh, no. And she goes up, barks orders, and I'm watching this. Now, granted, all this is going on and I'm taking it in, but it's still not dawning on me the fact of the direction of where this is going. And no, I watched them after they did that. And soon thereafter, they get the paddles out. And just like a medical drama, I hear him yell, clear. And he literally lifts off the table. And so I look at the monitor that's got like the heart rate and the pulse and on there, and it literally goes up once and goes right back to what it was doing. And in that moment in my head, I look at it and go, he's not coming back. Now, granted, I don't react emotionally to it. I just say in my head, he's not coming back. And I go back to watching what they're doing. Over the next, like they worked on him from start to finish, like 45 minutes. It was the longest time. And I later told them, I said, I knew y'all would work on him, but the fact that y'all worked on for 45 continuous minutes, I never thought it would be that long. I said, so I really appreciate all y'all did outside of the result of it. So in that whole 45 minutes, they shock him probably 5 more times and none of it really changes anything. And she finally comes over to me and she goes, I'm sorry, and she pronounces them. So understandably, I turn over to the other room and literally for 30 seconds, I have a moment, I regain composure, and I turn back around because as a man, I'm taught that I've got to compartmentalize things. So at that point, I call his mother, who's working from home at that point, and tell her. Now, she was under the assumption that we were going to the hospital. I was probably going to get admitted. We were going to be there our typical 7 to 10 days, and we would come home. I had to tell her that her son was dead on a table. And I will never forget the sound that came out of her. She regained her composure. I said, because she was working from home, I said, message your boss, tell him what's going on, leave work, call your parents because they live close. I said, have them drive you up here. This is the room we're in. Do not drive.
Yeah.
And so she did that. I then called my mother, who'd watched both of my kids many times over the years, and told her. And I'll never forget her response. As a side note, a couple of weeks later, my mother goes, how soon after Zachary had passed did you call me? And I said, about 10 minutes. And she said, you were eerily and almost stoically calm, like nothing had ever happened. And he'd only passed 10 minutes before that. And my response was, yes, I was going to be emotional about it. I said, but if I were a blubbering idiot, if you will, I wouldn't have been able to inform y'all what had happened. And I knew that I had to at least get that out so you understood what was going on versus me calling and not being able to talk and all that kind of stuff. And I do that. And then the next probably 10 minutes or 20 minutes, I'm talking to the care team and what happens now? Where is he going to go? Who do I need to call for the funeral home? That kind of stuff. I'm waiting on my wife and her parents to come up, and I'm sitting there alone with my son in this trauma room, and I'm just sitting there holding his hand the whole time, and I'm staring at him. And I tell people, because people always say, is outside of the actual passing, is there anything that stood out to you? I said, yes, I was shocked at how cold he got as quickly as he did. Like, now I knew it wasn't gonna be like a long time, but like the last time I touched him, put on the table, he was warm because he was live. And then
Right.
when I came back to touch him, like he was ice cold. It was shockingly fast. And that struck my attention. His mother came up and her parents came up and we were there for a while. And the other thing I tell people, I go, the hardest thing that I have ever had to do, and this even includes cremating my son.
Mm.
I said, after he had passed and we knew we were going to leave him there for the coroner, for them to keep him till the funeral home to get him, I had to take all of his cut off clothes, put it in his empty wheelchair, and roll it through that hospital. And I tell people, I said, that is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And I said, and then on top of that, I had to put it in the van, and we're 60 miles from that hospital. So we had to ride 60 miles, literally in dead silence, all the way home, is how that day went. Now, later that day, I went over to a family and tried to tell them, and we did funeral home stuff, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that was that day. It didn't really hit me until, like I said, I'm in my son's room. When I walked into his room, because the door is on the other side of this screen, I put his wheelchair in the other corner. In fact, his wheelchair's not, it hasn't moved from that corner since I put it there. But I came in here, I put his wheelchair there, and then I stood by the railing over where I'm sitting. And it was at that point, it was like a Mack truck of emotion. And I like doubled over at that point, is when it finally hit me. And that's how it started all of this journey.
Man, Jason, what a powerful story to share with us. And my heart goes out to you, and to have had to experience that and hear you, what you went through. And the one, it really impactful and powerful note that I wrote down here is you talked about you were grieving the life that you thought you were going to have versus the life that you
Hmm.
had in the beginning. And isn't that, and I think about that, and I think about how true that is for all of us, that especially at such a young age. Now, Zachary was what, around 15, 13, 14, I guess, maybe?
He passed when he was 15.
Yeah, 15. He's still The runway should have been a lot longer than what it ended up by being. And I think you handled yourself fabulously considering what you're in, the state of shock. And what really started to, I could see that why this message is so powerful for you. And then I want to dive into a little bit about the book that you wrote, the letters to Zachary. And you talk about it really being a space for rawness and unfiltered grief. And so why was it so important for you to start writing? And how has the book started to help you heal as well?
I'm one of those people that if I can't find a way to get it off my chest, it'll sit on me. And stress in general hits me in my shoulders. If it gets bad enough, like my neck will hurt and my whole upper shoulders and back will hurt. And unfortunately, I'm the type of person that I hold on to stress quite well. And so after everything had happened, I had grieved probably pretty intensely for a year and a half. In the community, some are shorter, some are longer. But I was about a year and a half. And it was actually at the time, it was the suggestion of a counselor I was seeing about journaling. And I laughed because she initially suggested it to me, and my first response was, I don't know how good of a writer I am. I don't know if that's my thing. And it's ironic that I say that because the initial responses of the first thing I ever posted were so overwhelmingly positive about how I wrote. I was just like, where did this come from? And so she suggested that to me. And honestly, I fought it for because like my son had passed and I had scheduled a therapy session like the next week is when I'd so she d- she told me it about 2 weeks after that, and I held on to that idea for probably 9 months. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to deal with it. It was going to sit over on the proverbial side table. And one night I'm big about being on social media. I always have. I like being on social media. I'm probably addicted to it. And I was watching a reel or a video on Facebook. And honestly, I don't remember what it was about, but there was something in that video that maybe a sentiment or something reminded me of my son. And I'll never forget, I was sitting on my couch next to my wife, and it just doubled me over. Like I was bawling, crying, just uncontrollably. And I finally regained my composure and I opened up a Word document and in proper like Oxford English style, I date Dear Zachary, and I just verbally vomited on a page. If it would have been a letter, it would probably been 2 pages that I just filled. Like it just kept coming and coming. And I did that several times a day for weeks. And in that time, as we all know on Facebook and social media, there's a group for everything. And so I was looking for grief groups and I happened to find a parents who lost a special needs child group,
Mm.
which I'm shocked that I found because grief is already a small topic area. And to find an even more niche area in that topic, I'm shocked that I found it. So I get in there and I get to know the admin very well. And finally, one day I messaged her and said, do you mind if I post one of my journal entries? And almost before I could finish the direct message, she went, yes, we either get no men willing to share that or very few men willing to share that. We would, because a lot of these groups, especially emotion related, it's 99% women in these groups. And and if there are men in there, they're lurkers. They'll read everything, but they're not active. They don't post that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I said, okay. I said, I don't know if it'll be today, but in the next couple of days. And so I found one of my letters and I copied and pasted it. And right before I hit enter to to post it, I went, am I in the mental space to post this? Because at the time it was probably 9 months, 10 months after the fact in that first year.
Right.
As noble as this is to share with these women, most likely all women that are going to read this, it's still the internet. And am I in a mental space to where if someone negatively comments on it, am I going to be able to handle it?
Right.
Or am I going to jump down their throat because I'm just in the mental state that I'm in? And in my fashion, I went, screw it, I'm going to do it anyway. And so I posted it and I didn't say anything most of the day. And then that evening, I got a massively positive response. It stunned me. I had a woman that said, we've never met, we've never crossed paths, you don't know me. I've never told anybody my feelings about losing my child that are deep down inside. And she said, I just read your letter. And she said, this is exactly how I feel, word for word. She said, you could have not said it any better than how I feel. And I said, I really appreciate it. And I'm glad it resonates with you. I said, this was inspired by my son. And I said, I'm just glad I could do something that you could connect with. And every time I posted it, I would get kind of those responses. And finally, after a couple of weeks, I went, I might have something here. I need to try to either expand this or grow this somehow. And whenever you do something that everybody likes, you start getting well, have you ever thought about writing a book? Have you thought about doing a podcast? And at the time, I wasn't in the mental space to take those on. And so finally someone says, have you ever thought about doing a Facebook page? And I was just like, what's that? And they said, go to your favorite like business, the page you pull up on, that's a Facebook page. And I said, okay. And they said, you don't really have to create more material. You just got to copy and paste what you've already done at this point. You could make it a blog or a journal. And so I started doing that and I got a small following. And then one day I just got this idea. I just started reaching out to some of the people I consider big names in the grief kind of content community. And I said, hey, my name is so and so. I think I have something here. Can you just give me pointers on what worked well for you and what you did? And you thought, that didn't work so well. I said, because I don't know what direction I'm going, but I'd at least like to know what the ins and outs are. And
Right.
literally all of them. And people with 100 followers, I had one with like 10,000 followers. I had one woman with 1.6 million followers that said, sure, if you're going to do a book, you're going to need a website and you're going to need to do A, B, and C. If you're going to go the podcast, right, you're going to need D, E, and F. And I went, thank you. I really appreciate it. And from that point, it just started. I was getting like 20 and 30 followers a day.
Nice.
And it's really started working out. So, long story short, I made letters to Zachary, one because it resonated with people, but other because I was initially trying to find men that were experiencing maybe not exactly the same thing I was, but in the ballpark, if you will. And I couldn't find anybody. And it was irritating me to no end. And so I thought instead of me complaining about it, let me make something and promote it to people that maybe they'll start
Amen.
coming. And that's
Amen.
really how all of this started.
Amen, brother. I was just listening to you about describing the book journey, and it was really grief was one of the things that got me into really starting to do men's work that I've been doing now. And when my father-in-law passed, I was the one who found him, and he had an accident in the washroom, and it wasn't pleasant to see. And looking to your point, you have all these communities, and most of the time it's filled with women, not very many men. And I just thought to myself, like, there's got to be a space for guys to be able to come to deal with life, whatever it is that they're confronting, whether it's grief, whether it's a major emotional event from their in their professional life or personal life, but you need to have space. And so I love the idea that you decided to change the paradigm of, hey, I'm not
Mhm.
sure I'm a writer, to becoming a writer,
Mhm.
being a published author, and leaning into that,
Mhm.
because we all find different ways to
Mhm.
teach and to lead. And then you've done a beautiful job with this, and just think that's great. And so I also want to talk a little bit about this grief journey also is really shaped what masculinity is all about. And so you've already talked a little bit about that in your initial story, but let's unpack that a little bit. And what does it really mean to you today to be a strong man?
You read in the intro that part of my goal is to explain to women the process that men go through just to grieve. And I actually one day came up with what I call the male grief commandments. That I
Hmm.
came up with 10 different points that I'm open with my wife and she's very receptive of it. But I thought if I had a significant other that wasn't open to it, what could I give her to give her kind of like an outline to maybe not make me open up right then there, but through time, get me to be able more susceptible to be opening up. And so a lot of the things are directed towards women, but I tell women all the time, when I say this to you, I'm talking about both sides. But
Right.
because I'm a man and this is what I've experienced, it's directed at women because this is what I've gotten from women most of my life. And so when I say a lot of things, I always preface it with, look, this is not a personal attack. I'm not coming after you. This is what I've experienced. And so, like I tell women all the time, I said, here's what you have to understand. I said, when it comes to men opening up, a lot of it's a generational issue. I said, I'm 48 years old. I'm Generation X. I'm the rub some dirt on it, walk it off kind of generation. I'm the, you got something to cry. Are you crying? I'm going to give you something to
Yeah.
cry about kind of generation. And I said, that's what I grew up. I was taught that if you're upset about something, it's short, sweet, and to the point, and it's definitely not out in public, and you're not open about it. And you basically, if something were to happen, like at work, I've got 3 days bereavement. I need to get it out in those 3 days, and then I go back to work. I said, that's what I grew up with. I said, now generations, the younger now are getting better about it. Is it where I think it needs to be? No, but it's better than what I dealt with. And so, like, I tell them, I go, here's some of the key things I try to tell you guys as in women. I go, look, when you sit there and get upset and talk to your husband or significant other, you expect them to sit there and listen to your whole thought, let you get it completely out. And sometimes you want us just to listen, or sometimes you do want our help to solve. I said, first of all, you have to understand we're problem solvers. So if you don't want that, you tell us up front. Otherwise, in our brains, we're gonna go, that's simple. You can go A, B, and C, and then there it's solved. If you want to vent, tell me you're venting and I'll be quiet. And I tell women, I said, the first thing that y'all have to do, and it's going to sound a personal attack, and it's not, you have to listen and not listen to respond. You, if you're waiting for that one moment that I take a breath for you to interject how my hurt feelings are hurting you, all you've done is subconsciously told me that my feelings don't matter and you will always come first, period. And I said, you're trying to get me to open up. I said, so if you expect me to listen through the whole thing, I expect you to do the same. And I said, I'm not going to do it all the time, but if I feel like it's important enough to bring to you, not to be harsh, you best listen. Because if I'm one of those people that doesn't open up much, and I do, and you, like, the other thing I say is, if a man feels like it's important enough to come up to you and your first response when he's done is, I can't believe you're complaining about that. Is that what you're really bothered about? Or something along those lines. I said, yes, men are simple creatures. I said, but things like that we don't forget about. And I said, men use sports analogies for everything. I said, for men, it's 3 strikes and you're out. We'll give you several chances, but once you cross that threshold where you're out, we're done. And I said, so it's not a threat. It's not, I'm just saying, here's what we're looking for.
Right.
All we really want you to do, men for the most part are about respect, whatever respect means to that man. And if my respect is, I want you to listen and take my concerns seriously the few times I have them. If you disrespect that, then I'm not going to keep opening up to you. As I tell them that. And then the last thing I'll say about that, I won't go through all 10. One of the things I've actually seen recently, and which kind of bothers me, is a lot of women these days, especially the younger generation, they all say, we want a man that's sensitive, that can open up. That's great and wonderful. But on the other side, on social media, I've seen women ridicule, belittle, talk down to men that actually do open up to them. And so I
Mhm.
look at them and go, you cannot have it both ways. I said, 99% of men are not going to be sitting there sobbing, crying all the time. We're not going to be crying on your shoulders. But when we do it, I said, you want us to be this way, but then you ridicule us for doing that. And on the male side of it, I said, one of the reasons why men don't open it up, especially around your more macho alpha males, if you will, is the moment we do it, we're called weak. Specific male parts are joked about, our manhood's joked about, all
Yep.
those type things. And I'm just like, you want us to do this, but we've got 50 hurdles around us to get over to get to that point.
Yeah.
And those are my big points to women, men that want to listen to them.
Yeah, I completely agree with you on all of that, especially the end part there. I think it's a journey for us in terms of being able to really walk that tightrope of how and when to be vulnerable and how to do that. I talked about, I did an episode, and I talked about change the word instead of saying being vulnerable, about surrendering.
Yep.
If you're willing to surrender, will you take the knee to your ego, right? To stop trying to be the lone wolf, stop trying to do things outside of what you can, or try to control things outside of your own personal life, then things start to happen for you. And so you're giving great advice there, Jason, because I think it's important that we understand, men and women, what we are asking for. What's that going to look like? Because we may not be prepared for what that looks like. And then if we truly want it, then we need to be willing to work through those things. And you talked earlier tonight about your wife raised up in New England area, so strong Catholic background. How has faith played a role in your journey through this trauma and the healing and the work that you're doing?
As a funny side note, my wife would now call herself a recovering Catholic. Honestly, the church we go to, she says to me all the time, we now go to a Baptist church. And she said literally the other day, I still can't believe we go to a Baptist church. I said, I bet you never thought as a Catholic you'd be coming to a Baptist church. But then again, in our family, I'm the outlaw anyways, because we got married in the Catholic church because that's what they did. And then afterwards, we both decided we didn't want to be in the Catholic church. And so the family took their brunt out on me. So it's okay. It's a title that I take with pride, honestly. As another side note, the first time I went to school, I went for religion and philosophy, so I can get preachy if I need to be. Faith has really helped out in the sense of being able to talk to God, creator, whatever you want to call the higher power that you believe in. If anything, just to have an ear to listen to. And as crazy as it sounds, the number one thing it comes into it, either Catholicism or Protestant church, is that it took me a while it finally dawned on me in my head is who better to understand the loss of a son than
Mm,
God giving his only begotten son. And it took me a long time for that to hit me. When it hit me, it's like it punched me in the chest.
yeah.
So that really helped out outside of just general prayer when it comes to just more difficult times and how are we going to get through this? And through all of that, it's led me to Letters to Zachary and just all the different podcasts. It's been a slow and methodical process, but in all reality, I've only been doing this 17 months at this point, and I've done podcasts in 6 different countries around the world, and I'm heading upwards to 100 podcasts in 17 months. I've
Nice.
got 6 this week alone. So, as a person of faith, that would lead me to say that the Lord works in mysterious ways, and ask and ye shall receive, your kind of cliched lines.
Yeah. Love that, Jason. Love that. What's next for letters to Zachary? Is it, and your mission? Are you looking to develop a program? Anything else? What's the next step here to really help grieving fathers speak out?
And I love doing all the media. Podcasting is a new standing on stage, if you will. Although I'm old school enough where I want to find a way to get actually on a stage where people are staring at me to feel that, because I'm a visual person. I read nonverbal cues and all that, and I play off that. And so, like the TED Talk, if you will, and I have tried to do the TEDx stuff, although I can't get their attention right now. So that's one of my big goals, to be able to do that. I still want to keep doing the media, and I would love to do bigger and bigger media if I can get that attention. And I say that more for the fact that the bigger the media I can get, the more eyes can get on the concept of what I'm trying to come across, not so much for selfish reasons.
Yeah.
Sure, anybody that gets there, if they said that they weren't slightly impressed with it, they'd be lying to you. But it's more for the fact of getting the message out. And at the end of the day, outside of helping men and women, the initial goal for me was, because my son had passed so young in life, I wanted to create a legacy bigger than just his medically hard life,
Right.
is what I wanted to do. And at this point, I have continued to achieve that. I'm wanting to do that, and I'm working with several other collaborators that we've got some pretty big things in the works
Nice.
that I can't really talk about. I wish I could, that I hope go through. It's only upward from here.
Right on. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm thinking, Jason, through this journey and maybe even prior to it, but that helped you in the journey. I'm not sure where this might have come for you, but at some point you may have had a mentor or you read something in a book or something that has really been, I'll say it's like a piece of advice or something that has really stayed with you. And how has that helped serve you today and continues to do that?
I'm gonna make this same statement, and honestly, I think it's gonna sound egotistical, and I don't mean it to be. I honestly believe, as a person of faith, everything that I've done has been inspired by my faith. It has not been me; it has been through my faith, yeah,
Yes.
100%. So when I say that, when I write and all that, and the things and that come to me to write, yes, some of it's mine, but most of it's not. And I say that because one of the quotes I came up with that I 100% believe, that I tell people all the time, I go, the quote that I came up with that I live by now is, though I strive for the mountaintop, it is the valley in which I live. And
Mm,
what I mean by that is we all want to be on the top of the mountain to be able to see the wonderful views and have the great moments and the sunsets and the sunrises. But the reality is on a day-to-day basis, we live in the valley, and a lot of times in those valleys are hard moments, are dark moments, are difficult moments, but it's those difficult moments that we deal with that give us the strength to be able to climb that mountain again, is what I tell people. And that's what I mean by that. And for those of us in the grief community that have lost, whether it be a child or a parent or a spouse, that kind of thing, we all know about the difficult times and be able to trying to claw tooth and nail climbing back up that mountain to be able to get to, at least, even if it's for a brief moment, I get to the top and then I fall off of it, we're still there.
yeah.
So that's how I live life at this point.
Love that. Love that. Jason, of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there was something that we didn't get a chance to touch on, what would be a takeaway you'd like our listeners to have?
Two things. The one thing I'd like to tell men, and I say this jokingly, but I'm serious about it when I say it. The men are interesting creatures, and I know I've been one all my life. Men are the one gender that does not like being told what to do. 99.9% of us do not like being told what to do. So with that being said, I go, you don't being told what to do, but when it comes to your motion, you let everybody and their brother tell you exactly what to do, when to do, and how to do it. So you can't tell me, if you come up to me and say, nobody's going to tell me what to do. Yeah, they are, because they're telling you what to do on how you express yourself. And especially when it comes to online, I tell guys all the time, I said, if you don't want to be known, hide behind a profile picture. You want to know how many millions of people do that every day? And I said, even if you post something and someone says something negative, I said, do you know how many idiotic things are posted on the internet every day? And you're worried about someone that you have no idea who they are making comments about an experience that you are dealing with? Really? That's the oxymoron, if you will, that I try to tell most guys. I'm just, don't tell me that you don't like being told what to do when in other areas of your life, they tell you exactly what you're going to do. Then the other thing is just for those that are interested, that if they would like to connect with me, my website is letterstozachary.com. And Zachary is spelled Zachary. And I say that because some people in the States spell it ERY. And I've got all my social media connections on there. I've got the coloring book I've produced. I've got my media experience, just all a ton of stuff on there for people that are interested. And those that may want to contact me, you can contact me through there or any of my social media sites for those that might want to talk. I'm
Right on.
typically, unless I'm asleep at night, I'm generally probably anything between 30 seconds and a 5 minute response time any time of the day.
Right on. Excellent. But I just want to say, Jason, thank you so much for spending time with us today and sharing your truth. You're very raw, you're compassionate. Love that. And your willingness really to step into pain and to speak from this is, I think, is really going to help a lot of men everywhere feel less alone We're going to
Mhm.
feel less ashamed and much more empowered because of this conversation today. And I'm going to make sure all the information on where you are on social media, your website's going to be in today's episode. And so as we close today, I just wanted to leave everyone with this thought, that grief isn't something that we fix. It's something that we carry, but you don't have to carry this alone. And if you're a man struggling to process loss, trauma, or a life altering change, don't stay silent. We have an offer for you here. Visit members.theawakenedman.net and start today by taking our free integrity challenge. It's going to be your opportunity to rebuild yourself with honesty, strength, and the support of a brotherhood that's going to see you. So live with courage, lead with heart, and let's get started to now. Thank you so much, Jason, for being on the show. I really love today's
Thank you.
conversation.
Thank you so much.